Imagine a reality where one single decision could trigger a sequence so intense it drags the entire world into the blaze, where age-old hostilities don't just linger, they erupt into open fire. Today, this isn't about quiet backroom negotiations, it's about warplanes in the air, open threats on every screen, and global giants staring each other down on the brink of a confrontation that could redefine the world as we know it. The delicate equilibrium between Iran and Israel has long been a high-risk contest of strategic moves, covert actions, and silent warnings. For years, both countries hovered on the edge of direct war, using underground diplomacy and indirect skirmishes to delay an all-out clash. But this time, the rhythm of provocation broke every rule of containment. It began with a wave of intensifying air raids, each more audacious than the one before. Israel's pinpoint bombings on Iranian military compounds and nuclear infrastructure provoked retaliatory missile storms from Iran, not through intermediaries, but straight from its own land. No longer playing behind curtains, both nations made their intentions plain, their language escalating in ferocity by the hour. The mind games that used to manage the tempo of war have now dissolved into sheer aggression. Decades of animosity mixed with fresh casualties from recent assaults have launched a cycle of vengeance neither side seems ready to abandon. Civilians who were once shielded under international law are now trapped in the crossfire as cities, power grids, and command centers come under targeted and merciless attack. The global community watches in disbelief as populated urban zones are reduced to ruins. Modern warfare unleashes its fury, while heart-wrenching footage saturates global news and forces world leaders to act. Yet the most frightening element of this moment isn't only the brutal combat, but the shrinking space for either country to de-escalate without appearing diminished. Both Tehran and Tel Aviv find themselves locked into perilous national stories, where compromise is painted as defeat. Political leaders in both regions face internal demands to showcase force, turning every military action into a mark of honor and defiance. The tempo of confrontation increases with each passing moment, sweeping in militant groups, destabilizing neighboring states, edging the Middle East ever closer to a complete inferno. The dreaded reality of an outright Iran-Israel war has come to pass, not due to one singular disaster, but through a ceaseless spiral of retaliations untouched by diplomacy or warnings from abroad. The barriers have crumbled, the gates burst wide open, and what once seemed like fiction is now playing out live before a stunned global audience for decades. The tension between Iran and Israel thrived in secrecy, layered under proxy wars, digital sabotage, and clandestine missions. Iran skillfully empowered Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and a network of militias across Iraq and Syria to pursue its goals while avoiding direct confrontation. Israel responded with precise strikes, stealth operations, and strategic alliances to disrupt Iran's sphere of influence without tipping into full-blown war. But that delicate mirage of control has now vanished. The silent conflict has erupted into daylight. Hezbollah's stockpile of rockets, unleashed in a sweeping display of loyalty to Iran, bombards Israeli cities and military installations in unrelenting waves. Israel's Iron Dome intercepts many, but the sheer magnitude overwhelms even its cutting-edge systems. In retaliation, Israel intensifies its aerial bombardments across Lebanon and Syria, dismantling Hezbollah bases with unyielding force. At the same time, the Houthis scale up attacks in the Red Sea, jeopardizing critical maritime channels and pulling foreign navies into the escalating crisis. Iraqi militias launch assaults on American positions, adding yet another layer of destruction to an already fragile terrain. The Middle East becomes a tapestry of synchronized violence where every blow triggers a fiercer reprisal. Regional nations are compelled to take sides as diplomatic and military tensions harden. Alliances, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar engage in fierce behind-the-scenes negotiations, attempting to guard their stakes while staying clear of the mounting chaos social platforms. International news agencies broadcast destruction in real time, sparking public fury and waves of protests across multiple borders. This battle is no longer just between leaderships. It has morphed into an emotionally charged campaign, drawing in entire populations. The groups that once acted as instruments of national policy now fight as autonomous warriors with their own momentum. And rage, the boundary that separated indirect aggression from full-blown conflict, has vanished. The proxy fronts have transformed into an integrated battlefield of devastation, pulling not only Iran and Israel, but the broader region into a hazardous spiral where the smallest misjudgment could ignite a calamity beyond imagination. The entrance of world powers has shifted a vicious regional clash into an unfolding international emergency. The United States, a long-standing defender of Israel, swiftly mobilizes its military arsenal in the area, aircraft carriers, elite fighter squadrons, and covert operations units now hover near the conflict zone, primed to step in if Israel's existence comes under severe threat. The US perceives Israel's security as essential to maintaining its Middle Eastern power structure. Any danger to its ally is interpreted as a direct challenge to its own authority. Meanwhile, China, having established significant financial and infrastructural ties with Iran in recent years, rises to counterbalance the dynamic. China has poured billions into Iran's oil fields, trade routes, and development sectors, considering Tehran pivotal to its broader Belt and Road ambitions to safeguard Iran is to safeguard Beijing's global investments and ensure its footprint in a region historically influenced by Western dominance. In contrast to America, China initially leans on diplomatic leverage, exerting pressure through its relationships with neighboring states and warning that any foreign violation of Iran's sovereignty would carry serious consequences. But as the battle intensifies and Western involvement threatens to tip the scale against Tehran, China discreetly ramps up its involvement by providing surveillance data, tactical equipment, and sophisticated arms to reinforce Iran's resistance. What was once a regional conflict now becomes an active chess match of global ambitions, each major power positioning itself not only for momentary sway, but for long-lasting supremacy. NATO allies tread carefully, aware that even the slightest error could drag them into a war beyond containment. Russia, observing silently from the sidelines, spots strategic opportunities in the growing disorder, ready to stir divisions among Western nations and reclaim leverage amidst the confusion. The presence of American and Chinese military forces in proximity generates an unparalleled risk of miscalculation. A single misjudged move, a mistaken radar signal, or an errant missile could set off an all-out confrontation between the planet's two mightiest militaries. Crisis lines blaze with frantic dialogue, but suspicion taints every exchange. The nightmare of a much broader confrontation hangs over every tactical decision. What was once a confined duel between Tehran and Tel Aviv has sucked in the great global powers, creating a flashpoint with stakes higher than anything previously imagined. While missiles scream across skies and troops engage on multiple fronts, the heartbeat of global finance begins to falter under crushing unpredictability. The Strait of Hormuz, a slim corridor through which nearly a third of global oil trade flows, lies dangerously near the center of escalating hostilities. With Iranian warheads threatening the passage, naval conflicts increasing in number, oil tankers grind to a halt or reroute, triggering an immediate surge in crude prices. Each delayed shipment magnifies panic across financial markets, triggering waves of fear from New York to Tokyo. The impact is sharp and unforgiving. Industries, from aviation to manufacturing, and average households worldwide begin to bear the brunt of spiraling energy expenses. Inflation, already a looming threat, hits heights not seen in decades, putting enormous strain on family budgets, national reserves, and public trust. Basic commodities see price hikes as fuel. Transport becomes more expensive, sparking unrest even in countries far removed from the core of the violence. Especially in Europe and Asia, scramble to secure alternative sources, but their choices are narrowing. The fragility of global supply chains, already strained by earlier crises, bends further under the weight of this fresh turmoil. Meanwhile, financial institutions prepare for a surge in defaults as corporations fight to stay afloat. Amid soaring expenses and dwindling revenues, currencies swing unpredictably as investors rush toward perceived safe havens, generating even more market instability. Central banks across the globe are forced into emergency sessions debating whether to raise rates to tame inflation or slash them to avert a financial collapse. The rising sense of global economic fear fuels direct political unrest as populations call for immediate responses from leaders who themselves are frozen by the sheer complexity of the unfolding catastrophe. Mass protests erupt in major urban centers as everyday people find it harder to meet their basic needs, pointing fingers at their governments for failing to shield them from the ripple effects of distant battles. As the economic impact intensifies, nations begin to look inward, prioritizing their own preservation, often sacrificing international cooperation. Trade wars emerge alongside the shooting wars, putting even greater stress on already fragile diplomatic ties between world powers. What began as a conflict between two regional enemies now threatens to tear apart the delicate web of global economics, exposing how deeply interconnected and dangerously vulnerable our world truly is. Once the gears of war begin to spin out of control, amid the growing violence, the voices of ordinary citizens grow louder than ever. The harrowing images of shattered homes, wounded children, and grieving parents flood social media channels worldwide, igniting a firestorm of public outrage that no government can fully contain. Demonstrations swell across global capitals, London, Paris, Berlin, New York, with citizens taking to the streets, demanding an end to the slaughter. These demonstrations are not one-sided. People from all walks of life unite in their pleas for peace, rejecting the brutality and questioning the decisions that allowed this tragedy to unfold. The viral power of social media transforms every civilian death into a global outcry, giving a human face to a conflict that diplomatic memos fail to capture. Hashtags rise to the top of trending lists as millions voice their sorrow, anger, and unity with those trapped in the mayhem. Grassroots groups, activists, and even prominent celebrities amplified the pain and suffering, urging policymakers to explain either their participation or their silence. Human rights organizations release urgent reports condemning both sides for striking civilian areas, breaching international humanitarian laws. The world no longer sees this conflict as a remote political dispute, but as a moral emergency that demands swift resolution. Public pressure escalates, placing politicians in increasingly difficult positions. With upcoming elections in several pivotal nations, voters make it unmistakably clear they will not support candidates who avoid advocating for peace. Lawmakers receive an avalanche of emails, petitions, and bills insisting on diplomatic efforts to end the conflict. Foreign ministers scramble to organize emergency negotiations, and leaders once committed to rigid positions begin to soften their rhetoric, nudged by growing public dissatisfaction. The people's voice, powered by digital platforms, now creates a global accountability mechanism unlike anything seen in prior wars. Even historically neutral countries feel the public's pull, stepping into the diplomatic conversation as their citizens urge them to choose sides. The worsening humanitarian crisis, unfolding live on screens around the world, becomes too pressing to ignore, forcing international leaders to acknowledge that continued warfare risks not only destabilizing regions, but also eroding the legitimacy of their own rule. The collective voice of humanity grows insistent, demanding the powerful finally listen to those without power and calling for the violence to end before it spirals beyond anyone's control as the Iran-Israel war expands. And begins to drag the major powers into its orbit. The United Nations, long regarded as the last resort for peaceful resolution, faces perhaps its greatest challenge yet. The Security Council, gridlocked by conflicting interests among its permanent members, fails to even release a joint statement. The United States, staunchly defending Israel's right to retaliate against Iranian hostility, blocks any resolution that could cast its ally in a negative light. China, eager to safeguard its financial and strategic investments in Iran, resists any proposal that could destabilize Tehran further. Russia, aiming to exploit growing divisions for geopolitical gain, supports Iran's assertion of defending itself against what it frames as Western dominance. The outcome is a diplomatic paralysis, leaving the world watching as war escalates without any meaningful action from the global community. Back-channel diplomacy unfolds as emissaries shuttle between key capitals seeking to broker ceasefires, but each initiative collapses under layers of mistrust and incompatible agendas. Smaller nations, meanwhile, bearing the brunt of the economic shocks and refugee surges, plead with the United Nations for urgent intervention, but their appeals are drowned out by the louder drums of great power politics. The credibility of the UN plummets as protesters across continents hold signs accusing the institution of being toothless and outdated in this modern era of high-speed conflict. Humanitarian groups call for access routes to deliver relief, but their requests are tied up in political wrangling and prolonged discussions. The longer the fighting continues, the weaker the UN appears, exposing its inability to function effectively in a world where major powers no longer compromise. The failure of higher-level diplomacy sends a chilling signal to other unstable regions, suggesting that brute strength now overrides legal order in the absence of a robust global enforcement mechanism. Rogue states and militant factions worldwide take note. Emboldened by the UN's failure to intervene, the very organization founded to prevent another catastrophic war now hovers on the edge of irrelevance, its authority undercut by the grim reality of rising superpower antagonism in this perilous era. The world absorbs a sobering truth: when peace talks fail and powerful nations refuse to give ground, no institution, no matter how well-intentioned, can shield humanity from plunging into disorder. The Iran-Israel conflict has exploded from a local feud into a worldwide crisis, drawing in global powers, shaking financial systems, and rocking the pillars of international relations. What initially appeared as a standoff between two ancient enemies has evolved into a reckoning for the entire world. A trial of patience, wisdom, and the capacity to prioritize human life over strategic gains. As rockets continue to fall and alliances grow more rigid, the anguished cries of civilians cut through the fog of propaganda, reminding all observers of the unbearable cost of violence left unchecked. The international community now stands at a pivotal moment where every action or hesitation could shape the planet's fate far beyond the combat zones in this maelstrom of risk. And reaction one fact remains undeniable. If today's decision makers lack the courage and vision to respond wisely, the world could find itself waking up to a disaster on a scale we've never seen before. But if the voices of logic and compassion rise above the noise, there is still a narrow path toward peace and restraint. May those in power act with wisdom before this fire engulfs everything we hold dear. Thank you for walking through this with me. May peace triumph, and may our shared humanity lead us back towards sanity and stability.